Welcome to the Painting Lines Podcast, your one-stop shop for all things tennis. Join Erik and Aidan in their discussion for updates on news and pop culture, and from hot takes to betting, they've got you covered.
Ready? Play. Hey guys, welcome back to Painting Lines Podcast. Last week we talked about on-court coaching and whether or not it should be allowed in tennis. This week we're going to be talking about the Italian Open and recapping, what we saw. So right off the bat, we saw Medvedev win his first ATP Clay 1000 tournament. Aidan, what do you think? How did that happen? This guy's been notorious for being anti-Clay,
Yeah, it's pretty impressive to see. His first win in Rome happened in this tournament, and then he's able to actually win the entire tournament. I think that Medvedev played well. He was just getting it done. And then in the final, I think really Rune seemed a little too patient to me. Rune was depending on his athleticism a little too much. And so he was getting into these longer rallies and wasn't necessarily going for shots as much. And Medvedev was taking those aggressive shots and ending the point early. That's how he ended up winning the match.
Yeah, exactly. So from what I noticed watching Medvedev play is he didn't really change up his style from hard court to clay. And you kind of see that in this tournament. It actually benefited him with the weather. There was a lot of rain, wasn't super warm, which has an impact on the surface. When the clay is cold and damp, the balls tend to stay hard and flat, and that's exactly how Medvedev plays. That's his shot. So I think the surface actually benefited him, and he was able to play his hard court style. Ultimately, I think this win could have been a fluke for him. I don't see him going very far in Roland Garros, especially if it stays warm and dry. The balls get more of a kick, more of a topspin, and then you have those Nadal-esque players like Rude, like Alcaraz, who are able to do better on that surface. I'm not too bullish on Medvedev on clay. I think this could have been a little bit of luck with the weather.
Yeah, so when it's colder like this, does it make it almost similar to grass with the ball almost skipping more?
Yeah, exactly. It's a harder, faster shot. It skips off the clay when it's cold and wet. And you see that Medvedev didn't change up his playing style. He was playing as if he was on a hard court. It's also harder to slide too. So you see some of the more athletic players struggle a little bit in this climate.
That's interesting. I think clay has got to be the biggest surface of the three surfaces that can be actually impacted by the weather that much. Because obviously I think grass earlier on in the tournament, like when the grass is less beaten down and dried out, it sort of probably skips a little bit less. But I would think that on clay, there's more of an impact if it's wet and rainy.
Exactly. I guess kind of going off that, do you think Medvedev made any significant adjustments from his hard court style to the clay season?
Well, I think obviously there's some level of adjustment, but I think in general, he knows that he's a high-level player, and if that's what was working was playing sort of like it was a hard court, it worked out for him. Because I remember after he won the tournament, he did say, like, I still don't really like clay. My one love is hard court. It sounds like he's still not a fan of playing on clay.
Yeah, no, you see it a lot when you said, especially with Rune, not being very aggressive, being a little too patient in points. Like you really see Medvedev able to drive in these hard, flat shots because if the clay was warm and dry, I think Rune would have had a better chance because he's more of a defensive player getting in these longer rallies. But with the surface being cold and damp how it was, you saw Medvedev able to drive shots and basically pin Rune into these corners where he was either getting back little shots where Medvedev was putting him away right away, or he wasn't even getting balls back and they were falling short either into the net or not even making it to the net. So that's a little something I noticed. Let's move on to these rivalry matches we had in the semifinals. This was a great tournament.
Yeah, speaking of how he beat Rune, the fact that he was able to beat Tsitsipas is really impressive. Similar to the final, it was a delayed match, so obviously the conditions are a factor. And, after he won, did you see his celebration?
Oh, yeah. He doesn't have much rhythm at all, but at least he likes to have fun out there.
Yeah, he goes for it, though. Kind of reminded me of how he did the dead fish celebration when he won the U.S. Open. It's like
Yeah.
he does something, and it's definitely gonna get a reaction from people, but it's definitely not the smoothest move.
No, no. That dead fish, that was a Fortnite celebration, right?
I think so. I
Yeah.
think so.
So when I first saw it, I had no clue what it was. I was like, what kind of celebration is that? But later I found out it was from a video game. And I guess
Yeah,
he plays a lot of video games. Do you know that?
I did not know that.
Yeah, he does. He's a gamer, big gamer. Yeah, I thought it was pretty funny how he kind of compared it to being drunk in the club dancing, where you kind of just let loose. You don't really care who's watching. You don't care how good the moves are, but you think it's good, you know? So
Exactly.
he's like, "Oh, well, let's see. I mean, it's probably gonna be on YouTube or in a GIF or GIF."
I did also notice though that Tennis TV made a post that implied that his dance was a payback for Tsitsipas dancing after beating him last year. Do you think that's true?
I think so. I think Medvedev and Tsitsipas, there's a history there, obviously. So I think whenever they play each other, one of them has to get the upper hand. So like back in Cincinnati when Tsitsipas hit that dance move, which side note, way smoother than Medvedev's. Tsitsipas was kind of nice at it. I think that was ingrained in Medvedev's head, and he was thinking about it the whole time, especially once it got closer to the end of the match. He's like, "What can I do to rub it in his face after I beat him?" And of course, the dancing just kind of put the cherry on top.
It's funny to see, but it's also kind of, you look at that and you're like, that's pretty petty of him. I like when you see someone like Djokovic where maybe they celebrate after, but it's not necessarily targeted at the other person like that.
Hmm. Yeah, it is. That's a good point, but it does kind of get into the new era of tennis. Like you don't have people dancing back then when they would win matches. Maybe a big fist pump or letting out a big roar, but it's kind of cool seeing the, I guess, pop culture aspect starting to be relevant in tennis. Like a lot of players are starting to kind of replicate other sports where you have touchdown dances in the NFL or like 3-point shot celebrations in the NBA. Like it'll be interesting to see if that gets carried over into tennis.
Yeah, I mean, like, you see just some guy hit like a really nice shot up the line and he's just like, bang!
Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah. What if we do start seeing that?
That'd be hilarious. But
But I've seen some tennis racket guitar celebrations. The classic.
yeah, you might see some of the younger guys doing that. Like, I could see Runa doing that. I could see him pulling that against Rude in his match when he's coming back, because that was definitely a mental thing when he started coming back against him.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, let's actually get into the Runa Rude semifinal.
Yeah, I mean, we had our bets on it last week. Both of our
Hey,
bets of the week were on that match, so I was pretty happy with how it turned out. I wasn't necessarily rooting for Runa, but
yeah.
my bet did hit. So
Your bet did hit, and my bet was looking really good after Rude won the first set and then was up a break in the second set. I'm like, oh, let's go. I got this. And then downhill. He just loses it. So yeah, I lost my bet. You won yours.
yeah, I got that over 2.5 sets.
Yeah. So actually, funny story. I was watching this match with my Norwegian cousins, and obviously there's the rivalry between Runa and Ruda because they're both Scandinavian, Nordic countries. The way Norwegian is spoken is a different dialect than Danish, like similar words, same words, but different dialect. Think of it like English and Irish or American English and Irish. And in Roland Garros last year when Runa kicked out his mom, remember he was telling her, he's like, leave, leave. So the Danish word was "foulet, foulet, foulet," and my Norwegian cousin was just making fun of him the whole time. Because in Norwegian, it's like "fula, fula," and I guess he thinks that that sounds way more graceful than Danish "foulet, foulet." Yeah, that was fun to watch.
But yeah, he had that comeback for Runa, and he was down the set in the break, and then he had a medical timeout. And
Mhm.
I think, like I was saying with the mind games, this is another kind of fair play issue for Runa. I mean, he's kind of been just continuing to build this reputation of not being the most fair player out there. And even though it's kind of allowed to take these medical timeouts, which you can't really make a rule about them having medical timeouts, because if someone's injured, it wouldn't be fair to like
Right.
force them to keep playing without getting a break. But if people start exploiting it too much, you're going to have to make some sort of restriction about it.
I know, I agree. And when he did it too, right before Rude was serving, I don't think that should be allowed.
Yeah, like you can only do it before your serve.
Yeah. So I think we can get into this. We can get into this more when we get into segments, because my what's new in tennis is an article about this. So let's save that for a little bit later,
Sounds good.
and then get into Djokovic and Alcaraz, two people that were heavy favorites to win this tournament.
Yeah, I mean, massive. The 1 and the 2 seed. Obviously, two best players in the world in a lot of people's minds. I think Alcaraz probably still is the best player in the world right now, but Djokovic loses in the quarterfinals. He's had a pretty abysmal clay court season based on what we come to expect from him, because I think at this point, people are still comparing Djokovic of this year to Djokovic of like 2021, where he was almost undefeated through like the first 7 months of the year. And he won the first 3 Grand Slams, and people are just expecting that sort of level from him all the time. And the fact that he's been losing relatively early in these big tournaments and hasn't been winning that much after the Australian Open, it makes it look like he just doesn't have it right now. And that just brings up a giant question mark for the French Open. I mean, will he be able to get it done at the French? Will he be able to turn it around? It's hard to say.
Yeah, these younger guys are coming for him, and I don't think he's as much of a force to be reckoned with. I mean, hopefully he proves me wrong, because I would like to see him win at least another Grand Slam to be the outright, Grand Slam champion leader. So, or Nadal. I don't know. I want one of them to come out ahead. I don't like the whole tie.
Yeah.
I like the undisputed.
Do you think when you're saying that, do you mean like you think he'll kind of become someone like a Dimitrov? You see them at a tournament and you're like, okay, I expect him to win a couple rounds, but I don't think he's going to win the tournament.
Yeah, I think this will be a lot different than Federer and Nadal, who I don't want to say Nadal's done playing, but he's damn near. So he was pretty much on top of his game when he stopped, he and Federer. Federer knew right away. Like it was a drastic, really good to not so good. Where I think as Djokovic, he's gonna hang around for a little, like at least a few years more, and go far in these tournaments, but not win, which is a weird thing to put up with when you're as good as you are, like pretty much goated in Djokovic's situation, to be a mediocre player on tour. Like either you have it and you're winning, or you kind of hang it up at that point.
Yeah, it's interesting because for Federer and Nadal, they were at the top, like you said, and then they just had these injuries. Their body let them down. Nadal looks like he's on his way out, and Federer retired.
Yeah, exactly. There wasn't any middle ground.
Yeah, exactly. The middle ground, I think that if Djokovic maintains his health, his body won't be able to do it, and time will catch up with him, but he won't necessarily get injured. And so we'll actually see that sort of slow decline where his body, while his body isn't able to actually perform at the level he wants it to, it doesn't fall apart.
Right. I think you're kind of seeing that with Wawrinka right now too.
Yeah. Wawrinka's a good example where
Yeah.
Wawrinka and Murray, if you look at both of them, right? They both won 3 Grand Slams. They were both great for a long time. Wawrinka didn't have major injuries that I know. I mean, he may have. I could be misinformed on this. But he kind of declined relatively slowly. Now he's like 80th in the world, and he still can win matches against great players, but you don't expect him to make it that far in a tournament. And then Murray obviously had major injuries and now is kind of coming back, but he can't come back to the same level that he was.
Yeah, Aiden, those are two great examples with great points that you just made right there. But let's move on to Alcaraz. What happened here? How does he lose to Morazan, a qualifier? Pretty sure this was his first ATP win. And this guy beats the number one player in the world. How does this happen?
It's pretty insane. I mean, did he find some sort of chink in Alcaraz's armor? What did he do that was so unique? And I think one part of it is that when you're playing a person for Alcaraz that he hasn't seen before, he probably has never even thought about Morosian. And now all of a sudden he's going up against a guy, and even though Morosian isn't the same level of player as Alcaraz, Alcaraz hasn't seen him play before, and so there's a little bit of unknown there. Watching that match, Morosian maybe did expose a little bit of a weakness because he was hitting these spectacular drop shots that were so good that Alcaraz, who's maybe the most athletic and fast player on the tour, just wasn't getting to these balls. And he was also mixing that in with a drop shot, and then he was charging the net as well. So even if Alcaraz was able to get there, he was putting away the next shot.
Yeah, I wonder if other players are gonna rewatch this match and try to take away how Morozhan played Alcaraz, because right now Alcaraz was pretty much unstoppable before that. He was going for his third straight clay championship right leading up to Roland Garros.
Yeah. I mean, the thing about it, though, is like you have to think that it could have just been that was just Morozhan's day and he wasn't going to lose against Alcaraz no matter what happened, which does happen. I mean, these are all top-level players, so if Alcaraz isn't having his day and Morozhan is, anything can happen. It kind of reminds me of when Lucas Rosol played Nadal in the 2012 Wimbledon. Like, Nadal, I believe, was the number 2 seed in the world at that point and was a heavy favorite to make a deep run or maybe even win the tournament, and then lost in, I believe, the second round against a guy that was ranked like 128th in the world. And it's just sometimes you come up against a guy and you don't know what he's going to bring, and he knows exactly what you're going to bring because he's seen hundreds of hours of footage of you, and sometimes they just break through and it's their day.
No, exactly. You know what they say, history tends to repeat itself, and that's the beautiful thing about sports. You really see this in any sport, any given day. Stuff happens. That's why you go out and compete. If if it was just the favorite that was going to win every time, then what's the point of even playing?
Yeah, I mean, in another sport right now, I mean, the Miami Heat are up 3-0 against the Celtics in the Eastern Conference Finals. I mean, they're the 8th seed. They're playing against the 1 seed. Nobody predicted that going in, and it's been a very one-sided series.
Yeah, Jimmy Butler, baby.
Yeah.
This is awesome. All right, let's get into Chorich. What's this guy's deal? He's making runs, dude.
I know. Another deep run from Chorich. Chorich has kind of had a topsy-turvy situation where he was doing well, then he was sort of just declining for a little while, got injured, dropped massively, but since his injury and his comeback, he's made some massive improvements. He won his first ATP 1000 event when he was at the bottom of that pit from his injury. And since then, he's just kind of been skyrocketing back up and has made deep runs at, 3 tournaments now in a row?
It'll be interesting to see how he does in Roland Garros. But yeah, how about the American tennis players, man? It has been a pretty disappointing tournament for American tennis. You have Ben Shelton keeps losing, Tommy Paul keeps losing, Fritz first round exit to Hanfman. The only highlight I would say from this tournament with American tennis players is JJ Wolf beat Hurkacz. That's a big win for JJ. Hurkacz was ranked number 14th. He's a legitimate player, and it's good to see at least one American get a big win. Tiafoe also made it pretty far, ultimately losing to Musetti, but made it to the round of 32, same as JJ Wolf. What's going on here?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because Hurkacz is one of those players where he's a top-level player. I mean, number 14 in the world, you have to be, but I haven't really seen him making, like, massively deep run. I mean, has he made any big deep runs recently? Am I overlooking any?
Yeah, he made it pretty far in Miami 2 years. Yeah, 2022. He lost to Alcaraz in the semifinal. And then Wimbledon 2 years ago, he made it to the quarters. So
Okay.
he's a good player. He makes it far, but yeah, like you said, he hasn't had any big tournament wins as of recently.
To me, like kind of like a Kachanov. I don't really expect him to win the tournament, but if he makes it to the quarters, I'm not
Yeah.
surprised.
No, it's a big name, you know.
Exactly.
But yeah, I was very optimistic on Tommy Paul this clay court season. Hasn't really panned out for me. Obviously, we were both optimistic on Ben Shelton. Remember a few weeks ago, we were
Oh
saying he
yeah.
could be, or a few months ago, we were saying he could be the next face of American tennis. Um, After that Australian Open run, he hasn't really done much, except he did get that new On Cloud sponsorship, which was pretty sweet. I do think he has the best looking clothes on tour. And he's playing in the Geneva tournament right now because he just spent, a week or so at the On Cloud headquarters in Zurich. And he said they treated him like a king, showed him around Switzerland, gave him all this new gear. It's pretty interesting to see him as a college student live this professional tennis player lifestyle on the tour.
Well, yeah. I mean, for On Cloud, I mean, they're not a big name. They're not. I mean, relatively, they're a big name, but not
Yeah,
compared
not
to
in tennis. Yeah.
yeah, not compared to like Nike, Adidas, Yonex, Dunlop. Some like against those guys, On Cloud is nobody.
Yeah.
And so I think they're looking at Shelton sort of like, I mean, that movie just came out about how Nike signed Michael Jordan. That's, I think, what On Cloud is hoping for with Shelton. Like, they're hoping he blows up and becomes this massive worldwide superstar, which to an extent he already is, but they're hoping he gets to maybe like top 5 in the world, at which point it would boost their brand massively.
Oh yeah, big time. They also signed Iga Swiatek too on the WTA.
Okay.
Yeah, so they're making moves.
Yeah.
How about Medvedev and Zverev? This was a tournament filled with rivalries. I like to consider this a rivalry just because of their history, but it's kind of turning into a one-sided rivalry here. You have Medvedev winning the last 8 of 9 um, matches with these, so at least we didn't have any salty Zverev comments after this match. Alleging that Medvedev cheated and whatnot. Do you think this is still a rivalry? Like, would you consider this a rivalry or no?
Well, I think it's weird because it's not really an on-court rivalry given the dominance of Medvedev over Zverev, but it's still an off-court rivalry. That's one thing that we're noticing with a lot of these next-gen guys is that the off-court stuff is really what's making the rivalry big. It's not that, oh, they're constantly playing and it's back and forth, like sometimes this guy wins, sometimes the other guy wins. It's really just that, oh, they don't like each other off the court and they're not afraid to show it, unlike how it used to be where if a player didn't like someone off the court, they would just not make a comment.
No, that's a really great point. It's kind of like the opposite of the Federer Nadal rivalry. These two were the top two players in the sport, and the reason there was a rivalry was because they kept meeting each other in the finals, you know, going back and forth. But Zverev isn't. Medvedev's at the top of the game. He's ranked number 2 right now, but Zverev isn't anywhere near like the Federer Nadal level. So interesting rivalry, like you said. I would classify it as an off court, not so much on court.
About that, with Federer and Nadal, you had sort of a mutual respect between the players. Like maybe when they were really intensely battling each other for all these tournaments, they weren't friends, which I think they are kind of now.
Mm-hmm.
But there was a respect there. They weren't going at each other's throats off the court and making all these comments.
Exactly. It was a classy rivalry. Like you had Nadal cry when Federer announced his retirement, and because they pushed each other.
Yeah,
exactly. I don't see Medvedev crying when Zverev retires.
Yeah. I remember seeing this interview of Federer, and they asked him who is his least favorite person to play, and he was like, Rafa Nadal. And then they said, who's like your favorite person to play against? And he was like, Rafa Nadal. Because it was like, even though he was the toughest guy, it was the guy that he wanted to see because he knew that it pushed him to be the greater.
Exactly. All right, so we have Roland Garros coming up 7 days, week from now. This is pretty interesting. It kind of leaves the tournament wide open for grabs. It'll be interesting to see how much different it'll be just because of the 5 sets versus the 3 sets. Like if we'll have as many no-name players that as we saw in the 500 and 1000 tournaments make runs like they did in Roland Garros. I don't know. I think the 5 sets will have an impact, and I think the stronger players will ultimately prevail. Do you think there's still going to be upsets?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think for someone like Djokovic, I think the experience will show. I think he'll be able to win a few matches, but honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if he got upset in like the third round or the fourth round. I think if he doesn't make it insanely far, it wouldn't be that surprising based on how his clay court season has gone so far.
Yeah, that would be unfortunate. I think Alcaraz has the best shot of winning, though. I would
Yeah.
see that.
Yeah, even though he lost like early in this tournament, that probably was just a one-off in my
hmm
opinion, and I think that most of the top players are going to have major difficulty beating him.
Yeah, I want to see an Alcaraz Runa matchup in Roland Garros.
I think that honestly, if I were to see that match and it wasn't the final, I think that match would kind of screw them for the next round because I think that would be an incredibly physical match. I think there would be a
hmm
ton of super long points, and that after that match, the winner would just be gassed for the next round.
Yeah, no, I agree. Another matchup I would like to see is Medvedev and Rude, just because of the contrasting playing styles. I want to see if Medvedev's victory was a fluke, as I mentioned in the beginning of the podcast, versus like a Rude who's I would say, clay court specialist, and see if Medvedev can still win against someone who's actually good on clay.
I mean, or see a repeat of him versus Tsitsipas, but on a drier and
Yeah, yeah,
warmer surface.
yeah. That'll be interesting.
All right, let's hop into segments. So, what's new in tennis? What did you see this week?
What is new in tennis? So Casper Ruud actually speaks out regarding the medical timeouts. We alluded to this earlier, but I personally don't think it's fair when you have someone calling a medical timeout before that person's going to serve. And just to provide some background context, Ruud was up 1 set in a break against Runa. Runa calls a medical timeout, and ultimately Ruud goes downhill from there. It was right before his serve. He loses the break and then ends up losing his serve twice after that, goes on to lose the match. So he's asked whether or not Runa's medical timeout was tactical. And Rude, being the classy guy that he is, saying, I hope not. I have to respect if he's injured, he needs the physio, but this needs to be discussed. He's not alleging or he's not putting any blame on Runa, but he's saying this is kind of a problem, needs to be addressed. Look at it because it's happened before. Um, you know, I personally don't think that players should be allowed to call medical timeouts before their opponents serve. Like, think about it. Tennis is all about flow and rhythm. And you have these players taking tactical timeouts to throw their opponent off. And I don't like that. I don't think it's fair.
Yeah, especially since it's such a mental game. Like, if someone throws a wrench in your head, right, when you're in like your mental temple or whatever, you're in your flow state, kind of like you were saying,
hmm
it's obviously going to mess you up. I mean, kind of building off of that, when Nori hit Djokovic with that ball,
hmm
Djokovic was like, I mean, everything he was doing up until that point was legal, but he didn't have to hit me with the ball. Like, he can take that medical timeout, which I don't really agree with, but then he was mad because he hit him with the ball.
Yeah, that was a feisty match. You got the Djokovic glare, just staring him down. He does that a lot too. Remember when Nadal hit him a few years ago and Nadal apologized, gave him a little wave, but Djokovic kind of brushed him off, like shook his head and then wouldn't look at him, just walked by. And Nadal just gave that little shrug,
Yeah, he was like, I
that
tried to
innocent little
apologize.
shrug. Yeah, he's like, I don't know. But going back to Runa, I think it was faking. I think it was completely tactical because that was the first time you saw him get his shoulder worked on the whole tournament. and the last time too. I think if his shoulder was actually injured, he probably would have had it worked on in the final. But
But yeah, I mean, here's the thing: is obviously people aren't fans of Runa doing stuff like that because he has a history of it. But if it's allowed, like, there's really nothing
yeah,
to stop him from doing it. Like, if he thinks that's his best chance to win the match and it's a legal thing, it's not
hmm
cheating, he can do it. That's my
yeah, you're
perspective.
right. You're right. All right, what's new for you?
My what's new was I saw this article about Hugo Gaston, and he was fined for this match against Chorich, where he lost the match to Chorich, but in the first set, on set point, Chorich had an overhead smash to win the set, and Gaston took a ball out of his pocket and threw it on the court. And believe that the goal, throwing the ball on the court, was so that the point would get replayed. And so
Oh,
he was fined 125,000 euros for throwing the ball onto the court, which is actually more than he has made for the entire year so far.
oh, that is a tough, tough look,
And I think
man.
it just shows how intense the ATP tour is about unsportsmanlike behavior. If they think you're cheating, if they think they can prove you didn't have an injury, it could be some severe backlash.
I've actually never been a fan of Hugo Gaston. Actually, seeing him at last year's U.S. Open, I was there in person, and I was watching him play Bublik, and this guy was just such a jerk to the ball kids. He was throwing water all around. He was yelling at people, like being just a not a cool player to watch. I actually got up and left. I couldn't really stand him. So I'm glad that they fined him. I think that's a unsportsmanlike move on his part, and he needs to do better.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Alrighty, what's your bet of the week?
Bet of the week. I am taking JJ Wolf over Hugo Dellien minus 130. I think that's a pretty good line for, like I said, Hugo Dellien. I'm not really sure who that is, but I think JJ Wolf's coming in hot after his win over Herkoch. So I'll be betting on him this week. That match is tomorrow.
Yeah, similarly, I also have a momentum pick, but it
Hmm.
is not for the American in this situation. I'm picking Gregoire Barrère. Hopefully
Mm.
that was a good
Mm.
pronunciation. Plus 135 over Tommy Paul. And it's a momentum pick. Like I said, Tommy Paul has lost his first round in the last three non-challenger tournaments he's played. And Barrère just hit a career high, and he beat Kachanov and advanced to the third round in Rome. So I think he's going to be riding that high, and he's going to beat Tommy Paul. Even though Tommy Paul is an excellent opponent, I think
Hmm.
the mental game, like we were talking about, one's at a high, one's at a low.
Yeah, I could see that. So we got two momentum picks this week. There we go. Hopefully those will pay out. All right, match of the week. I had Medvedev and Tsitsipas. uh, Revenge match, grudge match, you can call it even. You had the dancing incident with Tsitsipas in Cincinnati, and then Medvedev kind of returning the favor here in Rome. A lot of history, starting off Miami 2018. You had, I think, their first skirmish where Tsitsipas allegedly called Medvedev a bullshit Russian after the match. And then you have Medvedev kind of getting in his face, like, come say it to my face, Stefanos. What are you saying? And then calling him a baby, a little kid. If he wants to fight, he wants to fight. And then from that moment on, it has just been chippy between the two. And then you had in the Australian Open last year the big coaching incident where Tsitsipas's dad was coaching him in Greek, and Medvedev blew up at the umpire, calling him stupid, saying he's coaching. Like, how do you not see it? How do you not see it? So they planted a Greek-speaking umpire next to Tsitsipas's dad in the crowd and actually got him for coaching. So Medvedev wasn't crazy. His blow up was well warranted, I think. But getting back to the match, always love it when these two play. We have two of the next gen players going at it. So I hope that there are many more in the future. Medvedev comes in on top, obviously, because he ended up winning the tournament. So all around, great match. What about you, Aiden?
Yeah, I got to go with the other semifinal, Ruud versus Rune. We've mentioned it multiple times in this podcast so far. Both players, incredible athleticism. There were some really long, impressive rallies. But it was a tough mental battle, I think, for Ruud. I mean, he led Love 40 at 2-3 in the first set. Couldn't break him. And even though he ended up winning the first set in a tiebreak, I think it kind of showed that his mentality is a little bit fragile. And then obviously the medical timeout issue happened, and Rune was able to battle back from down a break, and then obviously took the third.
A lot of missed opportunities for Ruud. Couldn't capitalize. Well, that's a wrap. Tune in next week for a very interesting topic, and we will catch you later. All right, and that's the show. If you're not already subscribed, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. You can find us on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube at Painting Lines Podcast. Feel free to shoot us a DM or email us any questions or thoughts at paintinglinespodcast@gmail.com.